Okay. So thank you very much, Agnes, for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here. It's also my first time ever in Budapest. So yeah, I'm very, very happy about the opportunity. Today I wanted to tell you about this paper, and this paper is actually, we've been working on it for a long time actually. And right now we are revising it for a journal. So it's actually a good time to present it to finally get the strength to finish the revision and send it back. But yeah, all of your comments are very much welcome. This is joint work with my colleague Sergi from my university, Pompeu Fabra, Natalia, she's in Madrid, and Judit, she's at the University of Barcelona. And this paper is about the effects of access to abortion. What we're trying to do here is we're looking at a law that was passed in Spain in 1985. Before that, abortion was banned. And after 1985, it became legal and subsidized. So in theory, you could get an abortion in a public health center, or you could be referred to a private center. And even though it was one of those laws where so you could only get an abortion under certain circumstances, one of the circumstances was a danger to the health of the mother, and this was interpreted quite broadly. So it was actually, in practice, it granted access to abortion basically on demand. And so we wanted to, because it was back in 1985, we wanted to take the opportunity to look at long-term effects of access to abortion. Of course, the problem is that this was a law that was passed at the national level. So, it was from abortion is banned to abortion is legal. So everyone had access. So the hardest part was to come up with an identification strategy that would allow us to say something also about the reform. And what we're going to do is we're going to explain the fact that even though abortion was legalized at the national level, actual access to abortion was very unequal across Spanish territory because access to healthcare is it's at the regional level, and it's actually local. There was a lot of variation in terms of the regions that actually provided these services in public or private clinics. So in practice, some women that were living in certain regions of Spain for a very long time, they had no access to abortion clinics, or they had to travel long distances. So that's what we're going to explore. So it's not going to be, legal abortion versus illegal abortion. It's going to be legal abortion for everyone, but different access depending on where you live. And also we're going to exploit cohort variations. So women who are very young when abortion was legalized, they were exposed for their whole fertile life. Women who are 35 when abortion is legalized, they couldn't have avoided an early birth, like a teenage pregnancy, for example. So that's a variation that we're going to explore. So that's the plan, and we're trying to look at both short and long-term outcomes. So in the short term, we're going to look at whether legalizing abortion actually had an effect on birth rates. So fewer pregnancies were terminated. It could also affect marriages in the short term. And then once we establish that, we're going to look at the cohorts of affected women a few decades later to see if their lives were different because of access to legal abortions, what their complete infertility affected, their marriage history, their labor market histories, and so on. So that's the plan. Okay, motivation. So of course, this is about access to abortion. My view is that access to contraception and family planning has important social implications. First of all, it allows families to achieve their desired fertility, control its timing. Of course, it's also access to healthcare, so it has a direct effect on women's health, as well as potentially many other outcomes for women, which is what we're trying to establish here. Now, as you probably know, abortion regulation remains a heated topic internationally. And many countries have debated or reformed abortion legislation in recent years. Some countries have made it legal recently. Some countries have banned it recently. So, legal regulation is all over the place. So here I have some examples. Ireland and Argentina, where abortion was basically legalized recently. Poland and some US states where it was the other way around. It was recently banned. So this is Ireland voted. This is in 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018. Ireland is from the news. Ireland votes by a landslide to legalize abortion. Argentina in 2020, Senate approves legalization. But then Poland put no restrictions in 2021, so resulting in a near total ban. And also Texas, for example, near complete ban on abortion very recently. So, you know, it's like, how is this going to affect families and women's lives? That's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to study the causal effect of access to abortion on women's lives. And as I said, we're going to look at first short-term effects on fertility, marriage, and education. And then we're going to look at longer-term effects on completed fertility, educational attainment, and labor market outcomes. And as I said, we explored the legalization of abortion in Spain in 1985. So yeah, to summarize our identification strategy, we exploit cohort variation by age at the time of the reform and geographic variation by availability of abortion services in the province. And we'll talk, of course, I'll give you more details about this variation. Let me summarize what we find. So the first thing that we find, and this is something that other people have found for other countries too, is that abortion legalization had a direct impact on actually, you know, being able to interrupt unwanted pregnancies. So we see that after abortion legalization, there was an immediate drop in births to younger women, and that drop was stronger in provinces where actually there were abortion clinics available. We also find a drop in early marriages. So there are fewer marriages of very young women. And we also find that the effect is most pronounced in shotgun marriages. So this is marriages that happen immediately before birth, so during the pregnancy. So it seems like in the short term, the women were actually affected in terms of early births and early marriages. And then we follow the affected cohorts of women over time. And what we find is that these affected women, they had children later, but actually their completed fertility was essentially unaffected. So and they ended up having the same number of children that they would have had in the absence of legal abortion. They married later, but they were less likely to divorce. So what we find is that these early marriages that were avoided likely ended up divorcing at a higher rate, so they were less likely to divorce. We also find some effects on educational attainment, but only at the high school level. So women exposed to abortion were more likely to complete high school, but we don't find effects on college attendance or graduation rates. And in terms of labor market outcomes, we actually don't find significant effects. We find small effects on labor market attachment and earnings. And we've looked, and I can confidently tell you that the small insignificant effects on labor market outcomes. Trying to put all this together, we also use some data on self-reported life satisfaction, 30 years later. And we do find that women exposed to legal abortion when young report higher life satisfaction. This is just to try to tie everything together, because with all of the different outcomes that we show, some of our phrases were like, well, if it's good or bad. I don't know if it's good or bad, but women seem to be more satisfied with their life, with their even though we find no effects on labor market outcomes. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm going to show you. So what do we know already? There are a number of papers that have looked at related treatments and outcomes. In particular, regarding access to abortion, a number of papers have looked at the short-term effects of access to abortion on abortion rates and on birth rates. And most of those papers, I'm citing here Pompeu for Romania, some for the US, a recent one for Mexico. They do find that typically improving access to abortion has a positive effect on abortion rates and a negative effect on birth rates in the short term. There's also several papers, some of them famous, looking at the effects of access to abortion on child outcomes, let's say, using the idea that more or less or more or fewer abortions is going to affect who is going to have children or not, or who's going to have more children. And then depending on the composition of the women who end up having an abortion or not, this is going to affect whole cohorts of children. That's an interesting question. It's a different question. And people have found interesting effects. And then a third strand of literature, which is related, is the literature looking at the effects of access to oral contraception or the pill. And some papers for the US have found that access to the pill for young women had long-term effects on educational attainment and also labor market outcomes. So this is, I think, probably the most related strand of literature. What we're trying to do here is to provide credible causal evidence of the long-term effects of legalizing abortion for a range of outcomes for women. And this, there isn't a paper doing that before. I think we've seen the promise and really to identification. This idea that these types of reforms are usually at the national level. So in the US, there's some variation across states, but there hasn't been a paper that has looked carefully at the wide range of long-term outcomes. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so a brief history of abortion legalization in Spain. Spain was there was a dictatorship going on until the year that I was born in 1975. And of course, during the dictatorship, abortion was banned. And then the first left-wing government was elected in 1982. And one of the first things they said is they said they would legalize abortion. But then things got complicated. Anyways, in the end, the law was passed in July 1985 and it became effective in August 1985. So that's going to be for us the relevant date. And that's when the first legal abortions were reported. So we're going to, for the short-term effects, we're going to look essentially before and after legalization. And you brought in, so if abortions start happening, if legal abortions start happening in August 85, any drop in live births would be observed starting in December 1985, 4 months later, being very conservative in the sense of sort of late abortions and early births, but most likely 1986. So the reporting of abortions was in theory compulsory, so all centers had to report, but the reporting was sketchy in the initial years. So I don't know how much I trust the early 90s, but you do see that, for example, let's say by 2010, about 1 in 5 pregnancies ended in an abortion. So just for you to have an idea of the magnitude, which I hear is lower than in Hungary, where it's like 1 in 3, but still, 1 in 5 pregnancies being terminated via an abortion is, I would say, we would expect to see an impact on live births if that's the case. Of course, let me just say, I wanted to say something about the expected effects. Sorry. Let me just say, okay, about okay. I'm sorry, I'll get there. Okay. So I'm going to have 2 sets of regressions. One is going to be for the short-term effects, and the second one is for the long-term effects. And the only difference is that for short-term effects, we're just looking at before and after 1985. So before and after legalization, do we see changes in births and marriages in the provinces that actually had abortion clinics? And for the long-term effects, instead of looking before after, we're going to look at cohorts that were more exposed or less exposed. So for long-term effects, we're comparing women who were very young when abortion was legalized to women who were older, missed the year of birth, and the same geographic variation. Okay, so that's just okay. And of course, the identifying assumption is that the control provinces provide a good counterfactual for how our outcomes would have evolved in treated provinces. And treated provinces are those with early access to abortion services. Now, of course, the early access provinces are different from the later access or no access provinces. So I'm going to have to convince you that they were the same trend before and so on. The way to interpret our estimates is we're going to be estimating average treatment effects of the treated provinces and cohorts, and we're not going to be able to extrapolate to control ones.
Do you have data on the actual living place of those females who are getting aborted? How frequent is it that from control states someone travels to treatment?
Yeah, that's of course a good point. Typically in the sort of long-term data sets, we have place of current residence at the time of the survey, let's say, and place of birth. But we don't know exactly where the woman was living, say at age 14. Now, what we do, because there are phrases, of course, we're worried about this, what we do is we try to document just the volume of intra-province migration, and also to document whether migration was mostly in the direction of, towards provinces with access versus, and it turns out the migration patterns are not, so are in the direction of our estimates would be conservative in the sense that women are moving more towards the provinces without access.
If it's not moving, just traveling there, can you do anything with that?
Okay, so about the travel, of course, women were not living in a province with no abortion clinic. They can always travel to other regions. Yeah. So there are some frictions there because, as I said, the health system is at the regional level, but you can do it. So in a sense, our treatment is very weak, right? It's good. Our effect is going to be very attenuated because we're just estimating the effect of the difference in the cost of an abortion for someone who had a clinic in their town versus someone that had to travel. And that's relevant when we had to choose kind of the geographical aggregation. We could have done, smaller than city, municipality, province, region. So we ended up province. This is medium size. There are 50 provinces in Spain. Spain is kind of big in terms of surface. So we think that it's a cost of moving across provinces, not just to the bigger town in your province. It would be like to a completely different province. So it's costly, but it's not. I mean, you wouldn't have to travel 1,000 kilometers. It would be So
how much time? I mean, how many kilometers?
It depends. It depends where you are. It could be 200 kilometers. Okay, but this is important, and this is I think the issue that took us that made the paper longer. Just thinking about exactly how to define the treatment and how to identify the women who were living here and there.
There's a question over there.
Oh,
I think it is quite recently, and I was wondering whether, I don't know the regulation on access to abortion, but we say the ones that can be used at home, and whether you can get it over the internet or in the abortion clinics, that to the extent that the use of these might become widespread, that it might be under reporting. The abortion, like medicals or because if you can only get it from a clinic, then it will show up in your data. But if people order it from the internet, then you will see a lower level of abortions reported than what actually occurs. And I was also thinking there might be regional variation in that, because if you live somewhere super rural, you might go for this option, especially if you differentiate the state.
Yeah, this is a good point for recent period, right? So we're going to be mostly thinking about women who had access to abortion or not in say the late 80s, early 90s. So I don't think that back is an option. Now, this is the point. I've never heard of I realized only this week reading the news that you can get these kinds of abortion pills over the internet, I guess legally, but you can get them. In Spain, you can just go to your clinic and they have the option of surgical versus non-surgical. So there's really no incentive to pay for them and illegally then you could go to the clinic, but yes, for recent years, it's an issue. But not illegal for people like Netherlands. Yeah, in Spain, you have to go through. Yes, I think that's Thank you. Okay. So, about the geographic variation, this is what I was just describing. So, we know we documented that access to abortion services was very unequal across municipalities, across provinces, and across regions. So, what level of aggregation do we choose? We chose to go with province. There are 50 provinces in Spain, and by 1995, so 10 years after the reform, 11 out of the 50 provinces haven't reported a single abortion in any health center, public or private. Actually, the vast majority of abortions took place in private clinics. So you would go to your public health center and they would refer you to a private clinic, and then you would go there and get it at zero cost, or you could just go to the private clinic directly and pay for it. So our The treatment here is that abortion would have been more costly for women living in provinces with no abortion clinics or with fewer abortion clinics. This is a map of Spain. The Canary Islands are moved, okay, so you can see the 50 provinces. And this is the provinces. So in red, you can see the provinces with at least one health center providing abortion services in 1989. So 4 years after the reform. Actually, what you see is a lot of persistence. So some provinces just are still not providing these services, and some provinces providing them from the beginning. This is actually the time variation. So this is the provinces with abortion clinics over time. And you can see that, in 1990, there was about 30 something provinces, and by 2000, there were still 40 provinces only. So there's a lot of persistence.
And it's just one more question, how, was there a specific reason, or do you know any reason why in some province, abortions offered and in others did not?
Yeah, so there's several, the Catholic Church, So some provinces were more conservative, and the regional government actually, decided or had some informal policy that wasn't provided. And sometimes it was the individual doctor. So in the main province hospital, there was no doctor that would perform it because they were allowed to object. And also as a third factor, which we document, is in some provinces there were a lot of private clinics. In other provinces there were only the public ones. Where there was like a network of private clinics providing maternity services, most of them would provide these services. And also the cities versus rural. So there's a number of factors. Some of them are related to ideology or religiosity. Some are related to urbanization, and some are related to the network of private clinics, pre-existing maternity clinics. So the provinces that provided access were not a random sample for sure. But what I wanted to show here is that there's a lot of persistence. So we're not using switches of provinces. We're just grouping provinces essentially into groups, high access, low access provinces based on the early years, because there's not enough variation there. So we don't have a staggered treatment adoption. We have just before, after essentially, and the treated control. Okay, so we're using a number of data sources because we have a range of outcomes. So birth and marriage certificate data, administrative data, annual reports on registered abortions, fertility surveys, labor force surveys, so on. Okay, so let me jump to the results. So I'm going to show you first the short-term effect on fertility and marriage, and then the long-term effects, and there we have the range of outcomes that I described earlier. Okay, so short-term effect. This isn't going to be a simple diff and diff, where I'm just going to show you changes in birth and marriage rates shortly after the reform, so before and after, in provinces with and without abortion clinics, or with more and fewer abortion clinics. Showing you 5 years before and after. Of course, we can change the time period, but so the outcome variable is the birth rate or the marriage rate in province P and month T. So this is the monthly level. Post, this is after the reform, after abortion is legalized. And supply is, so we have two measures of supply of abortion services in the province, either the number of abortion clinics in the province per population, or a dummy for any clinics. And the main specification that I'm showing you, I'm using 1989, because it's the first year where we think we have like a real the census of abortion clinics, but we also show different periods. Okay. We also can control for a battery of demand factors. So we are trying to capture the supply of abortion services. But of course, more health centers performing abortions could be reflecting higher demand. So we can control for a range of demand factors, such as religiosity, the use of the pill, and political leaning. And then, of course, we also conduct event studies. So these days, you always have to any different data that you do, you also have to show the event study. So we're also having leads and lags. So basically, the year or quarter or months before and after to see the dynamics. Okay, so results, birth rates. First of all, what are the expected effects? I've been talking as if we just, it's obvious that we expect legalized abortion, fewer births. Actually, that's not the only possibility. So legalizing abortion could have a negative effect on birth rates if abortions increase and pregnancies remain the same. But it could also be that legal abortions are just substituting for illegal abortions or abortions abroad. There's evidence that before legalization, women were traveling to other countries to where abortion was legal, like the UK. And it could even be that that legalizing abortion has a positive effect on births. If, for example, pregnancies increase because of say increased sexual activity or lower use of contraception. Okay, so that's the, so it could go either way. In practice, this is summarized in one figure what we find on birth rates. So here, year 0 is 1985 essentially, and so this is a coefficient for the effect on birth rate, so the interaction of treated province with host. And what we see is, the 2 years before the trends were similar in the two groups of provinces, and after legalization, we see a negative trend. So, fall in birth rates in provinces with more access to legal abortion clinics. Okay, so this is the table for the static specification. Sorry for those in the back, but what I want to do in the table, the only thing is to document that the drop in births, you could see it for all age groups, but it was most pronounced for the younger women, at least in terms of fraction. So we find an overall negative effect for when we put all births. So we see an overall significant decline in births. And then here we're splitting the sample in births to women 21 years old and younger versus older than 21. We could use other age cuts, it would be similar. And essentially what we find is that the effect is driven by women who are younger, 21 and younger in this certification. This is when we use the continuous treatment variable, and the same is true when we use the binary treatment variable. Okay, so this is what the kind of this is what motivates the identification strategy for our long-term effect, where we're going to be comparing women who are 21 and under when abortion was legalized versus women who are older. Okay, we also find an effect on marriages. Now, the effect on marriages is completely driven by the younger women. We don't find any effect on marriages for women older than 21 or so. So this is the table for marriages. So as you see, the effect is not significant overall. It's only significant when we look at women younger than 21. And it's even stronger when we look at shotgun marriages in particular. So shotgun marriages, the way we identify them is for birth certificates. We can see when a baby is born, the date of marriage for the mom, so we can identify women who are married shortly before giving birth. And there again, we see a significant reduction in shotgun marriages to very young women in provinces with early access to abortion. So those are the short-term effects. The main short-term effects. We looked at other outcomes as well, which I didn't show. But the main finding is that we find a fall in birth rates after 1985 in provinces with early supply of abortion services, especially among younger women. In terms of the magnitude, because it wasn't obvious from the coefficient sizes, essentially it's a 6% effect. So 6% lower birth rate in provinces with versus without. Again, remember the treatment is not huge, it's just that lower cost of accessing an abortion. We also find a reduction in marriage rates for younger women, and the magnitude here is about 15% fewer shotgun marriages to women under 20. We looked, as I said, at other outcomes. We actually don't find effects on direct health effects on women. Some people, some in other countries, they have found that actually legal abortions substituted for unsafe illegal abortions. We don't see that in hospitalization rates or in death rates. So that's good news. Okay, so I think I have, how much time do I have?
We have a good 30 minutes left.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Great, so let me now move on to the long-term effects. So now for the long-term effects, the identification is slightly different. Now it's not gonna be before and after the report. Now it's going to be women who are more exposed versus less exposed to legal abortion when they were young. So exposure to legal abortion is a function of women's age at the time of their birth. Our main sample, and of course, we've also played with this, includes women who were between 11 years old and 30 years old when it was legalized in 1985. So if you were 11 in 1985, then you had access to legal abortion for your whole adult life. If you are 30, well, you couldn't have avoided so you couldn't have access to abortion by 30. So outcomes that were already determined by age 30 should be unaffected. So again, here it's not going to be cohorts that were completely exposed versus cohorts who were never exposed. It's more about exposed younger versus exposed older. So again, it's we're really it's you know, if we compare women who were 13 versus 19, the difference is really just a few years of exposure. So keep that in mind when interpreting the results. We're also going to use both the binary and the continuous exposure variables. So the binary one, we're just going to use the 21 age threshold, but this is, we can also use other thresholds. It's just that. So an indicator for whether the woman was under 21 at the time of legalization, and the continuous one is just your age, basically, you know, your age when abortion was legal. Okay, so let me first show you completed fertility. So I think people are usually interested in this outcome because some people, when people talk about access to abortion, at least in Spain, some politicians mentioned that perhaps improving access to abortion would have negative impact on overall fertility rates, so just the volume of children born. So it's important to understand whether actually legalizing abortion results in hopefully in fewer children being born. So how do we do this? We do this in two ways. One way is we take fertility surveys, like recent ones, where we have the whole fertility history of a sample of women, and then we know when the woman was born, and we know how many children she had and when, and whether she had an abortion and so on. But we also have the administrative data on births, so we can sort of calculate total number of births to different cohorts of women across provinces. So we can do it both sort of at the individual level with the survey data and at the aggregate level cohort province with administrative data. I'm going to show you here the results from the survey data, I think. So the outcome here, it is going to be either the total number of women, total number of births for a given woman I, who was born in cohort C and in a province P. Or we're also going to look at age at first birth, because of course we also expect an effect on age at first birth. We include 50 provinces, 20 cohorts, as I said, and the specification is the one that I described. So exposure indicates women who are 21 or younger in 1985. So, you know, controls are older than 21 and treated are younger. And supply is, again, the number of abortion centers in the province in 1989. And we control for province and cohort 6. Okay, so this is completed fertility results using data from fertility surveys. And yeah, different definitions of the treatment and the supply variables. And the outcomes, so first we look at age at first birth for women who have had at least one child in their lifetime. And then we can also look at number of births by different, so you know, by age 18, by age 21, by age 34, by age 44, because when we expect this, fewer births at early ages and perhaps more births at later ages, but we don't know what the end result is going to be. Okay, so the first thing that we, yes.
So this question is related to the question. So how do you do it? Even moved during the lifetime?
Yeah, so right, so I mean, internal mobility in Spain is is low, it's not like the US. And we know both where they're living at the time of the survey and where they were born. So we actually practice what we do is we find both, and we also document that actually up to in some cohorts, up to 20% of women actually move provinces. So what we do is with the robustness check using province of birth and the province of residence. But we never started exactly where they were living at age, say, 13. Okay. Okay, so age of first birth. We find a clear effect on age at first birth across all the different specifications. So women who were exposed to legal abortion at an earlier age were older when they had their first child. And so when we use, let's look at the specification with where the two variables are binary. So treated times any clinics. So here we're comparing women who are under 21 versus over 21. Legalization in provinces with no clinics versus clinic, and they interpret the 0.7 literally. So the treated women had their first child 0.7 years later on average compared with the control women. So that's a magnitude. We also find, not surprisingly, that there are less likely to have a child by age 18 and by age 21. This is the actual cutoff that we use. So, we expected to find something by age 21. And now later ages, that's what's more interesting because we kind of don't know what to expect there, if the overall effect is going to be negative or not. What we find is by age 34, and again, sorry for those of you who can't see the numbers. By age 34, we see, actually, it's not clear. So numbers are close to zero in some specifications, negative in others, never significant. By age 44, actually, the coefficients are small and positive, meaning that we don't find an effect on completed fertility, or at least fertility by age 44. And the coefficients, they're, again, small and positive. That's how I would interpret that. So our takeaway here is that we don't find negative effects on completed fertility, legalizing abortion. This is one just to show you. So now I'm going to show you the event study figures. Now are going to look a little bit different because now we have not time in the horizontal axis, but cohorts. So I'm going to be grouping, women born before 1959, and then, women born this year. So these women were older than 21 at the time of legalization, but not too old. And these women were, younger and younger at the time of legalization. So these later groups, they were very young, so they would have been fully exposed to abortion legalization. And what I'm showing here is the effect on age at first birth, which you can see is significant for the very young. Okay, great. So now I'm going to move away from fertility outcomes, and we're going to look at the broader set of outcomes. So, family formation, more like marriage and divorce, but also educational attainment and labor market outcomes. So now is where we're going to be using more recent surveys, actually up to very recent years. And we're going to be looking at long-term outcomes for individual women. So the outcome Y is going to be for individual woman I, for whom we know the year when she was born, the province where she was born and where she lives, and we observe her in year T. So this is, for example, for labor market outcomes, we use labor force survey data from 1992 to 2018, where the women in the sample are between 18 years old and 56 years old. Okay, so we're kind of covering, of course, they're observed at slightly different ages, but we're going to be controlling for cohort and year fixed effects. Okay, so exposed is going to indicate the affected cohorts. So the women who were very young at legalization, and supply again is the number of clinics in the province. And now we're going to be controlling for province fixed effects, cohort, and year of the survey fixed. Okay, so this is the first outcome that I want to show you is marital dissolution. So what we're using now is whether the woman is separated or divorced at the time of the survey when they're adults. And what we see is that the women who were very young at the time of abortion legalization are less likely to be divorced when we observe them later on in the survey data. This effect bites in particular for the cohorts that were really very young. So these were like 11, 12, 13, 14 at the time of legalization. Of course, I mean, here you wouldn't expect like a sharp drop at the exact cohort. Where we draw the line is really arbitrary. It's just that younger women are more affected. So we see this negative effect on I shouldn't say negative, so it's a negative effect, I mean, a lower rate of divorce among the more treated cohorts. These are again our different specifications. So again, think of these as we're surveying adult women in recent years, actually before the Great Recession, just to and we're using the same identification strategy.
Sorry, when you talk about divorce rates, divorce compared to marriage or compared to population?
Yeah, good question. No, this is so we're taking everyone and we're using, so this is the dummy whether you're currently married at the time of the survey. This is the dummy whether you're currently divorced. So this is, so we find that the fraction of women who are married remains unchanged, but fewer of them are divorced. So the way to interpret this, I guess, is those women that were not, we did not have access to divorce and married, we know they married earlier, they were more likely to marry earlier. They would have divorced at higher rates, so that we see some of those marriages have developed by the thing that we observe them later on. I mean, that's the way we interpret it. So, yeah.
So you don't have information on when they actually married or divorced? Just there?
No, that's it. Yeah, no, we don't exactly. So. Okay, now we move to education, and this is the type of effect that we find on, and maybe, I don't know if this is related to the marriage and divorce effect or not, but the cohorts that are most affected are the same cohorts. So here the outcome is whether you're a high school graduate or whether you ended up graduating from high school or not. Here we do have a story for why we only expect the youngest cohort to be affected, which is, these are the women who were below high school graduation age when abortion was legalized. So these women were again 11, 12, 13, 14. These women were very close to high school graduation already. But anyways, we see that these very young cohorts of women were more likely to graduate from high school when they had access to legal abortion.
Have you maybe tried what happens if you do the same thing for men?
Yes, we have tried for men. It's actually it's one of the things referees, of course, that it's in the paper. We find very small, so no significant effects for men.
Okay.
Yeah, but
not even on life satisfaction, right?
Do we have life satisfaction? Okay, I don't know if we have the life satisfaction. Yeah, I mean, we didn't necessarily think of, looking at men as a placebo or anything, because it could have been effective.
Yeah.
Some of the signs are sort of along the same, so the lines are the same, but they were smaller and it's in life satisfaction, I don't remember. We looked at it. Yeah. Well, we haven't looked at directly yet, but we were meaning to was to look at, the matching where the affected women are marrying the same types of men that they're marrying later. So maybe they're marrying different types of men. We haven't looked at this directly, but we could. Yeah, I think that's interesting. But we haven't. Okay. So these are the. Is this my?
No.
Okay.
That's 17 minutes.
Are you sure? Because I see here the recording is 54 minutes, so.
Yes, because I think I started it earlier.
Okay. You told me.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the regression results for educational attainment. So what we find here is an effect on educational attainment, but it's driven by the high school margin. We find actually very small, essentially zero effect on college graduation. They're not significant. So the margin that seems to be reacting here is not college graduation, but high school graduation.
Can you mention somehow when the education impacts the abortion decision? So it's here. It's not the case.
You mean?
I mean, it's a decision, I think, so I'm not sure that it's one way direction, but
So you mean the decision related to education? Could, I mean, it could affect for sure, so you're thinking of education decisions and fertility decisions that are jointly determined? Yes, of course, right, but here we're not saying. That I think that's, so it's a good point, so here we're not looking at the effect of having an abortion on educational attainment directly, right? This is like access to abortion in your province when you're young on educational attainment. So it's hard to think that your decision about your educational attainment would affect access to abortion in your province, right? So I think, so I agree with you, but the interpretation of this is not the effect of you individually on abortion, but the effect of access to abortion. So I don't think that we're getting problems from that direction. Okay, so now for labor market outcomes, here's where we don't find any effects on participation, employment, unemployment, or earnings. The three initial columns are from labor force survey data. So labor force participation, big zeros, precisely estimated zeros, employment 0.00, so really nothing, unemployment again 0. For earnings, this is from Social Security data, so it's not an issue of precision. We have, I mean, we can have as many observations as we want, depending on what years we include and how we define the sample. We find effects, so this is log earnings. So if you take again the middle coefficient, which is the binary, so it's a control treated versus control, the magnitude is like 1.5% in a way. So small positive coefficients, not significantly different from 0. So it is what it is. So we have to, I guess this is consistent with high school, the returns to high school being low in Spain, which is in fact the case. Yeah, so it is what it is. Small, basically 0 labor market effect. So finally, we wanted to say something about, does it have any effects on well-being? What can we do about this? For this, we actually take the EU SILC, the Survey of Income and Living Conditions, where in some ways you have questions about life satisfaction. So, we have the question on overall satisfaction with life, and we also have a range of questions that we summarize in an index for, combining chronic illness, whether you feel depressed, whether you feel calm, you feel happy. So we construct a summary index of well-being. And here, just to give you one number, this is the results from the summary index, which is standardized. Actually, these coefficients are arguably too large, so I wouldn't take the point estimates literally. And they're so large that they cannot possibly come, I don't think, just from the direct effect of having had an abortion. It's more about, we must to think of this as the whole package of having lived in a region that offered access to abortion when you were growing up versus direct effect of having an abortion. So 0.3 statistically, this is the summary table, this is better. Okay. So this is the summary table. So the well-being summary index and the effects on satisfaction with life. Again, so the second row is where we have the binary treatment and pre-post, so you can interpret the magnitude better. The difference is about 10-15% of a standard deviation in terms of life satisfaction. This is in, I think, 2013, so this is many years after the women are all adults. Okay, and okay, so that's the base set of result that I wanted to show you. Let me just briefly mention the different robustness checks that we have in the paper. We can define early access to abortion services in different ways. We pick one, but we can use clinics in different years. We can also, vary the number of cohorts that we include. We can include, narrower sort of group of women that were between, say, 14 and 27 in 1985, or different choices. This doesn't seem to matter much. And we can also, of course, when we do the binary measure for exposed, we can use different age ranges or continuous, doesn't really matter, so the results are not sensitive to them. Okay, so on my computer it says 1 hour, so I took out. So this is we're doing the paper. So as I told you, we evaluated short and long-term effects for women of access to legal subsidized abortion, exploiting the legalization of abortion in Spain in 1985. What we find is, first of all, we find that the reform led to an immediate drop in birth rates to younger women, driven by provinces with actual early supply of abortion services. Then we find that the affected cohorts of women were more likely to graduate from high school, less likely to marry young, and less likely to divorce later on. We don't find significant effects on completed fertility or on long-term labor market outcomes. And we do find that almost 30 years after the reform, women who had better access to abortion when young report higher life satisfaction. So that's kind of the picture. So overall, the way that we interpret the results is that access to abortion when young seems to have overall kind of positive effects on women's lives, coming from both, avoiding unwanted births and possibly unwanted marriages very young, access to education, and then, completed fertility is unaffected, meaning that they're better able to time their desired fertility. So, in terms of policy implications, in this case, in the one paper where I think, we agree that the implications are that improving access to abortion seems to be a good thing for women's lives. And that's it. Thank you very much.
For the amazing time management, so we can have time for questions.
I have a possible idea about the issue originally raised by Agi, that women may be traveling to other provinces to have an abortion. So if you have spatial data, right, which means that you could exploit spatial econometric methods. For example, you could calculate a spatially lagged value of clinic per inhabitant, which would measure some kind of an average availability of abortion services in the neighboring provinces,
Yes.
particular province. And if you interact that with your treatment variable and you get something significant, then it would imply that the women might actually be traveling to other provinces. If it is significant, then you will not have to worry about this.
So you want the availability of services in the surrounding provinces?
Yes.
Okay. So you want sort of finer, so now we're just being better off and saying what's going on in your province. You want us to also use information on, say, how far do you have to travel in a sense. No?
Yeah.
We could also calculate kind of the distance from. We don't know the municipality for everyone, only for the larger municipalities. We could calculate the distance between your municipality and sort of the nearest abortion clinic. We could technically do that for most people.
Yeah, of course, is your decision to make what you consider to be.
Of course, we made the decision of to go with province, considering everything. We didn't think about using finer sort of measures of distance, and again, we decided against it for several reasons. But it's true that we are not explaining the variation in the surrounding provinces of how we don't. The variation of how far you have to travel. So in certain provinces, you would have to travel, you have to cross several provinces to get there. But in other cases, you just have to go to the neighboring one. So that might be what.
Besides, the geographics of Spain with all the mountains, distance in kilometers, it's not the same.
Right, okay, so you could also explain time, travel time instead of actual distance. Yeah, we haven't done for sure.
Any more questions?
I think it was-
Two questions, the first about these abortion centers, so do they also provide some other healthcare services which might also impact the life satisfaction of female.
Yeah, so that's a good question, so that's a good point. So there was basically no opening of new centers, was pre-existing centers that were already providing services, and now they extend the services to, so they were doing prenatal care before, and they were doing
So that
maternal maternity services before. Was there a question, or there was an expansion in the overall, okay, but yeah, I haven't actually looked this directly. I just, by looking at the data on clinics, we could see that the clinics were not moving, they were existing, they just started providing the service. But we could look at this as an outcome check, so you're maybe thinking that it's not just into practice to abortion, maybe because they were providing abortion, they were also providing better medical care.
or maybe better decisions than.
And I actually, like, I sort of ruled that out, but without actually looking at the data. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, so my other question would be related to the labor market, because I maybe I missed something, so when you say that there were no important effects, so that was no important effect on average over the women's career, or did you look at it like employment at age 25 or like that?
Yeah, so here we're merging many years of market data, and we're conducting for cohorts. And year of the survey, so directly, it's we can go for birth year of the survey and age, so we're controlling by age by controlling for a cohort and year of the survey. I mean, yeah, we thought about whether, I mean, because these women are different ages. But we're controlling them, so this is the variation of birth, but we may also want to show the effects conditional on age, not just to show. Yeah, just we're intuitively showing, you know, like at age 40. They have similar, yeah.
They really consider it suppressing, but.
Yeah, I know, we looked, but we tried, but now we're convinced. They're just aren't, I mean, they aren't.
Is it because they have the same number of children?
Right, so completed fertility is not affected, they have the children, so in a sense, when we observe them later on, the treated ones are closer to fertility, so. I don't know, maybe we could do more in terms of teaching out like age effects and time since maternity effects, but yeah, I just, you know, I don't want to keep pushing, which is, you know, we're used to the same identification strategy for everything else, here we found a zero. You know, yeah, we could look more, but this is a good point, like time since birth is, of course, so if we think about the child penalty, our treated women are closer to childbirth.
You have one question on that, right?
My question was related to this, satisfaction thing, I'm just wondering if, maybe, you know, those areas where you have, these clinics, maybe you have, access to better services and, I don't know, amenities and these, can affect, you know, the life and satisfaction, maybe not.
Yeah, the crucial thing is whether, yeah, why would affect only women, whether. Presumably, I mean, of course, it is true. So one other thing that I was concerned about is we're talking about the mid-80s when the platform government comes to power, so they are doing a lot of things. They're not just doing legalizing abortion. For example, they create a family planning office at the municipal level, and these are providing more than abortion service. They're also providing access to information on contraception and so on. If the regional variation in those additional services correlates with the availability of abortion clinics, this could be kind of an additional channel for some of the effect that we're seeing. For example, let's say if they're providing access to the bill, even though the bill was legalized at the national level in 78, so it's not, it shouldn't be a concern, but we can't completely rule that out. And in particular, yeah, so health services related to family planning, but not just abortion. This could be pushing the same direction. So it could be kind of another channel for some of the effects that we rephrase on all this, so then, but I think it's maybe part of this. We haven't been able to document those at the local level yet.
I have two questions. First is when you look at the employment effect, are you controlling for education? No. Because for me, it's just weird that they have. So there's significant effect on education and then you don't find an effect on employment. And I would. From the top of my head, I would say that if they're higher educated, they should be.
Yeah, sure.
There should be something, so that's why I was thinking whether.
I can relate this to just a descriptive regression where we look at, the effect of high school graduation on employment and see if maybe those are small. Okay, but this is the fair point, so, okay, so controlling for education or not. And that's the square with what we know in Spain about differences in employment rates for women with and without high school degree.
And the other question is, I was, it was really interesting what you said that these lifetime well-being effects are quite big, so they cannot come from the individual effects. So what do you think? Are there any, spillover effects from living together with females who could avoid unwanted children, and so.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to speculate there, but maybe it is. It's just in terms of magnitude, how many actually, what's the fraction of women would have used these services when young? I'm not sure. I tried to. Unfortunately, the fertility service in Spain were designed mostly by men, and they didn't ask about some very specific questions about their abortion history. So like, have you ever had an abortion? So I don't know exactly, how many of the relevant cohorts had an abortion at the early ages. The magnitude, if it's like, as I said earlier, 1 out of every 5 pregnancies ends in an abortion. I don't know how to translate this into the fraction of affected women. But let's say that, imagine I had an abortion when I was 18, and then I have a younger sister, and the experience of me being able to access abortion services could affect not only my well-being, but also say my sisters, for example. But that's pure, speculation. I really have no.
Just a question about this 21 years age limit. So what's your explanation about why 21? And are you sure that hasn't increased in the last 20 years, maybe due to the educational expansion?
Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for that. Well, the answer is actually that we looked at the effects on birth rates in the short term by age, and the biggest difference that we found was at 21. But of course, it goes through if you use 24 or 19 because it's mostly women who are 21 and younger. But yeah, that's the way that we came up with it. We just did it, birth rates by age, and we found that the largest effect in terms of magnitude of the coefficient was for 21, 20.
But if you check it for different periods, for example, maybe it's different in the last 10 years.
Yeah, but when we use how old you were in 1985. So yeah, we're not saying that now, of course, now very few women under 22 have children. And that was also the case back then. It wasn't a huge number, but the impact was larger for.
You still have a question, right? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.